it going, everybody, and may the 4th be with you. So it's been a little while since I've done some Star Wars Black Series video reviews. Obviously, I just put out the Rogue One Imperial supersized video review a little earlier this week, and I've kind of been neglecting my Black Series collection. Now, long-term thinking, I did buy a bunch of these up front, and I still have a ton of these that are still mint in their package. I do want to eventually review everything that's in my collection, but a lot of these are much older figures, so really there's no timetable for me to be putting out these reviews. Could be a few years down the road before I get through everything, but I do want to work my way through my collection at some point. So the timing of these reviews, the one I did earlier this week for Rogue One Imperials, this one in celebration of May the 4th, and also the soon-to-be-released Mandalorian and Grogu movie that's going to be coming out here in just a few weeks. Seems like a pretty good time to revisit this particular set and basically show you what I've got. So, as far as these figures go, they're actually specific to the second episode of the TV series, and as far as Mandalorian and Grogu goes, for this set, this is specific to a particular scene in that show. So basically, I'm going to be reviewing these separately. I'm going to go over some figure details for each one of these. I'll give each one a rating, and I'll wrap it up with some closing comments. So let's jump right in. We're going to set this guy aside for a second here and focus on Kuiil. And as far as this figure goes, it's a completely unique, one-of-a-kind figure. I don't think there's any other release for a Black Series Ugnaught, but I could be wrong. And that's what this figure is. His species is an Ugnaught. And if you recall, their first appearance was in Empire Strikes Back, where they're basically down in the bowels of Cloud City and recycling machine parts and that kind of thing. So as far as this figure goes, yeah, it's got beautiful texture and styling just all over the cloth. Lots of different cloth details and whatnot. Different texturing for this wraparound piece as opposed to his tunic. Even the gloves and the pants and everything, all very nicely done. You got this leather texture on this backpack here. It's very nice. Set that aside for a second here. As far as his accessories go, you've got this cap that'll come off, and he does have some nice detailing on the head sculpt there, so it's not just glued on or whatever. Pointy ears, you got some hair around there. Interestingly, they kind of miss some paint applications on the back, so they may have cheaped out on that just a little bit. Works fine though for the most part. Got some nice eye detailing here, and the cap itself looks pretty cool. These molded in goggles and the silver rims. Looks like a little workman's cap one way or the other. Now this wraparound scarf or neck piece or whatever you want to call that, it's actually a single piece with the backpack, and the backpack itself is kind of hollowed out back there. And I'm pretty sure you could take this piece off, but I'm not going to do that. I don't want to warp or stretch the plastic. And for the last piece here, you got this nice short rifle, which is almost kind of like a blunderbuss. And it does have some nice paint applications here on the handle. You got this strap that's actually a separate piece, and that can be maneuvered around a little bit. There's some interesting ways that he can carry this thing. So you can have it kind of over his shoulder like that, kind of behind the shoulder, if you will. Now, we only see Kuiil in the Mandalorian series for a brief time. He's only in a few episodes. But from what little he's in the show, you do actually get a very good impression of this particular character. He's essentially a man of peace. So I would dare guess that this rifle is essentially maybe for hunting, but definitely for protection. Definitely not out there trying to start any business or whatever. Overall, I think this figure does have a pretty good mix of paint and colored plastic applications. So for example, these shoulder pieces, they're painted. So are the wrists and gloves here, these pieces, but the base layer is actually this sort of olive green plastic here, kind of this gray-green plastic. So there's a few little bits here and there. You got a silver belt buckle, it's kind of nice. One thing that stands out to me is not so great. This neck piece, which is actually part of the main body, it's not a separate piece, is painted. The main base layer, I believe, is this sort of kind of burnt orange color or whatever, kind of light brown, whatever you want to call that. And unfortunately, paint application on the back of the neck and around the front, whatever, just the entire neck piece does not match the face very well. You could definitely tell a difference here. And it's not a glaring issue, I will say that, because I think the way the designers anticipated it is the head will cover up most of that, and also the wraparound piece. So it's really not super noticeable, but when you get in there and start looking for the details, you definitely catch it. So also, given his overall body type, I think his articulation is pretty decent. It's not bad for basic posing and that kind of thing. He has a decent amount of head movement, whatever, can definitely swivel around, tilt left and right and all that. A couple of spots that I've come to find that are a little bit lacking. What I would say is, yeah, he's got some good thigh swivel there, some good knee bending, pretty darn good ankle tilt. The only problem though, and this is kind of minor, it's probably not a big deal for anybody who would want to pick this figure up, is he can't quite get into a kneeling pose. No matter how hard you try, he's not going to quite get down there. Most other figures can do that. He's got enough ankle tilt, his legs and everything, that you can get him in some pretty dynamic poses if you really need to. One glaring issue that I have found with this particular figure, if you look at the way the hands are positioned, obviously he's got a trigger finger here and he's got a gripping hand here. Now the gripping hand would obviously want to go over the barrel, right? So you want that. Problem is that his elbow swivel and rotation isn't quite on par with what you need to be able to hold this rifle in sort of a trigger action position. So I've personally found that no matter how you try to do it, you really can't get him into a very good trigger position. So you can kind of get the hand up and have this cocked inside of his elbow like that, but I can't get the other hand to reach around and grab that barrel. So no matter what I do, and since this is the main accessory for this particular figure, it just seems like that's kind of lacking, to be honest with you. So a little bit of a shortcoming on this particular figure here. So I'm going to try my best to get this around and show you an actual pose that you could do with this gun. This is about as close as I can get. And it's a little unusual for this series and a little bit unfortunate because I think every other Black Series figure I have that has a rifle or a staff or something to that effect that is a two-handed type weapon can actually hold their weapon normally. So for a figure that's kind of in the mid-cycle release of the entire Black Series, you know, where they've kind of really beefed up the sophistication of their figures and that kind of thing, it just seems like they really kind of let the ball drop, I think, on that particular level of posability. So yeah, that's really about as close as I can get. So yeah, he definitely cannot hold his weapon with two hands. Other than that though, it really is a great looking figure and it can hit all the basic poses pretty well. It's just that one thing that they totally whiffed on. There again, he's a man of peace. Be that as it may, let's go ahead and give this guy a rating. So just as a reminder, this is my rating for Star Wars Black Series figures. It's a rating of 5 categories of 5 points each for a maximum total of 25 points. So there again, I think the details on this figure are pretty nice. Again, articulation is good enough for some basic poses, but notably lacking in a few ways. I mean, if they're going to give a figure a rifle, they need to make sure that that figure can hold its rifle. Quality is pretty good. There's a logical mix of base colored plastics and painted surfaces. The paint applications are a bit mixed. Spot on for gloves and forearms with the backpack. That's a complete match color-wise, but the neck doesn't really match the head very well. Overall, I'd say this figure's design is pretty accurate. I could see Hasbro doing a mediocre job if they did any background Ugnaughts, but as a study for a specific character, I really think they did Kuiil justice. And that's going to bring his total to 16 out of 25. So now we're going to set them aside and move on to Mandalorian and Grogu, the Arvala-7 set, aka Battle of the Mudhorn. Anyways, we're going to get this set out of the box here. Alright, so you got the long rifle, got little baby Grogu, got the Mudhorn egg, that's very nice. You got Grogu's pram. And a little clear stand that the pram can sit on top of. Very nice. Mando's sidearm here. And the main man, Muddy Mando. Holy cow. Now, one thing I'm going to say straight away, since I just got this out of the package, is the joints are surprisingly a little bit loose. Every other Mandalorian type figure, and I'm not talking just the Mandalorian, every other Mandalorian, minorly with the exception of the females since they have skinnier parts, but not to a great degree, they all stand pretty well. This one has relatively loose joints, and he doesn't seem to really want to stand as well as most of the others, so that's a little bit surprising. And in my view, a little bit of a drop in quality. At this point in the series, he's based off of the original Mandalorian release. This is the very first one that went out. Essentially, he has every part that the original one has identical, except for the chest piece, and that is integral to the plot. He gets his chest armor busted up and eventually gets upgraded. And to that extent, it just bears reminding that at this point in the game, he does not actually have a jetpack. So you'll see some later Mandalorian releases where he does have a jetpack, and there's a specific reason why he does not this early in the series. So just something to keep in mind, I guess. But yeah, as far as standing him, holy cow, surprisingly loose. I kind of feel like this one should have been on par with the original release. So anyways, moving on with comparisons. Yeah, he obviously has a different color scheme because he spends this entire scene rolling around in mud with a giant vicious creature that's trying to kill him. So there's a couple of ways to look at that. Now that's something else that's interesting that I didn't notice before. So I believe at this point he got enough money from his bounty hunting to pay for a piece of Beskar, and he got the shoulder pauldron sculpted. He didn't have his family crest stamped on it yet. That comes a little bit later. But yeah, I completely forgot about that. At this point, he does actually have this piece. So that's actually different from the original too. This is from a Scarif trooper, if I remember right, or like a shore trooper or whatever you want to call that. So anyways, like I was saying, basically, yeah, this figure has far fewer paint applications. So they could kind of get away with much more simple paint design, sort of. Within that, it's not completely monochrome. Obviously, there are some variations here, so you got a little bit of paint application from the back of the cape here. He does fall down flat on his back, but bits and pieces there. Yeah, obviously his gauntlets and his gloves completely caked in mud. Same for his boots. Essentially, his upper thighs and his inner core don't quite get hit with that much mud. So definitely fewer paint colors, but much more intricate detail than what's typical for any Black Series figure. And it's really subtle, but also very nicely done. If you get in there and really look at these details, I think it's done very well. I do kind of feel like they whiffed on a couple of areas. So like with the helmet, it's basically just completely brown, and that's not totally accurate. There should be a little bit of silver shining through here. Not a whole lot. Given that different parts of his body are not caked with mud, it just seems like a little bit of a glaring issue that this particular piece is completely coated with brown, except for the visor, of course. I feel like with the visor, you got a little bit of a mud splatter effect on here, but they could have varied up the texture a little bit. And I'm not going to go note for note on every single piece of this figure, but really, if you get in there and you look around, you'll see some areas where it looks like, yeah, they probably could have improved on that just a little bit. But overall, yeah, I would definitely say well done. And that's an interesting bit there too, is if you lift the cape up, yeah, he definitely has the correct color scheme for this version of the Mandalorian in the TV series. So as a point of comparison here, basically same color scheme. So we'll set him back for just a second so we can talk about Grogu here. Now the thing about him, I would say, is this is basically just a single molded plastic piece. I mean, it looks like you've got some little hand inserts in there. Obviously they can't really move. I guess the head can swivel. That is a separate piece. But as far as the body, that's a single chunk of plastic, and it doesn't even look that great. I've got a few Grogus, and all of the other ones look far better than this one, I think. In my opinion, the hair follicle paint is kind of bad. It just looks strange to me. It looks like a bunch of little worms on top of his head. And I'll show you a difference with the other Grogu I've got to compare to here in just a second. I mean, I'm good with the closed eyes. That is specific to the scene, so So there again, this Mando can't really stand very well. I feel like in spite of everything, this figure should at least have a single articulated arm. They could have definitely done that. They've put more detail and articulation into smaller figures. I kind of feel like they cheaped out with this particular piece. So on to comparisons, that's his pram, and this is one from another one that I have yet to review. We're kind of getting a sneak preview today, so we'll pop that open here. Now this particular Grogu is in a bit of a seated position, but he is much more nicely detailed. So you got a little bit more color application on the face there, around the nose and whatever, kind of give him some rosy cheeks. He is in very obviously a seated position, but he has rotating arms, so at least you got something to mess with there. And the hair follicle sculpt on this one is kind of that newer sort of inkjet printed style, just blends in much more naturally, so I think they did a much better job with that one, as opposed to the Mandalorian Grogu version. I don't know if you can tell that difference on camera, but there is definitely a notable difference. I would say the sculpting on the cloak is definitely much better on the newer version. Definitely some improvements there. Basically, they just fine-tuned it. But yes, anyways, as far as the pram, here's the one that comes with the Mandalorian Grogu set. Obviously, the color on this one is kind of a light gray, kind of a warm light gray, and the standalone Grogu pram is basically pure white with some paint accents and whatever. Looking at this, you got to assume in the series that they don't actually change prams or anything like that, so you would think it should be an identical piece, but it's not, obviously. You can see a lot of differences with the hinge on the side here, paint applications and weathering, so I kind of feel like this is something that they kind of could have, should have kept consistent. They obviously did not. Now, another point that you could argue is maybe that they cheaped out, didn't give this one a cowl or a cover on it like with the newer one. I don't think that's necessarily true though, because if you're talking accuracy to that particular scene of that episode, that cover does not actually come down. So yeah, it could be argued that they sort of cheaped out, but I kind of feel like it's accurate for the TV show, so it doesn't really matter. So you can have him sitting in his pram and doing the little force thing there, so that's pretty cool. Now on to some other accessory notes. So there again, you have the mudhorn egg. Hand pop the top on this, and this is specific to a scene too. You got that kind of yellow goop in there. And if you haven't seen the show, definitely watch it because it's pretty funny what ends up happening with this egg. So you got a pistol here. It appears to be nicely painted. It actually has two paint applications. So you've basically got a silver base paint, and then they painted the handle brown. So actually looks pretty nice. And that pistol, of course, can fit inside of his holster. As far as the actual rifle, this is something else I kind of feel like they whiffed on a little bit, and I don't know why they did this. But if you look at the color scheme here, it's quite a bit different from the original rifle. So the original is kind of a little more of a matte gunmetal, and this one's a little bit more silver. And of course, the stock is a much lighter tan, kind of a tannish brown or whatever. I don't know. I just feel like there should have been more of an effort to match things up for this particular figure as he progresses in the series. And this is probably not an issue, but something else I would point out is, and I think this is true if I remember correctly for the original Mandalorian, is the joints are unusually kind of gummy feeling. They don't have a stiff kind of a notchy feel like later figures do, which isn't a huge deal. That doesn't impede your ability to pose them or anything like that. It's just a different feel, and I don't think quite as good. Having said that, he does try to take down the Mudhorn with his rifle, and you can absolutely recreate that scene. The thing you cannot recreate, though, is the piece that's most critical to this particular scene, which is surprising to me. Towards the end of the scene, he's actually holding a knife, and this particular figure does not come with a knife, which is kind of a whiff in my opinion. I kind of feel like if they're going to base a figure kind of like a deluxe set on a specific scene, they need to get that scene right, and that is something they absolutely should have included, but they failed to. That really does take away from this character in my opinion. So anyways, I'm not going to go into great detail on this figure's articulation. What I would say is, as I understand, later releases definitely improved on this particular figure a little bit, but even so, with the original release, I found it to be pretty darn posable, pretty easy to get in some great action poses. You got a full range of motion, anything you need to stand and pose this particular figure. If you want to look at more details on that, you could definitely take a look at my original Mandalorian review, and I'll have a link to that in the description. But just to keep this particular review kind of brief and on point, we're going to kind of breeze past that, but I would definitely say that if you have an original Mandalorian, this is basically the same as far as that goes, so nothing any different there. But we're going to go ahead and jump into a rating. Again, details I think are really good on this figure. I feel like they should have put a little bit more into the paint applications on the helmet and the cape maybe, but for the most part the sprayed on mud detail and color variations are subtle and really nicely done. Articulation for Mandalorian is very good. Again, like I said, it's very comparable to the original one. They've done better Grogus in later releases though. As far as accessories, what comes in the box pretty well rounds out the scene, but I do think it's absurd that they didn't include a knife, which is absolutely critical to the way that scene plays out. So quality is very good on this particular figure. It's essentially a midlife release for the Black Series line, and aside from certain details that are either missing or could have been improved on, I think it's a solid effort. As far as accuracy, I'd say that's very good. With some minor nitpicks on the mud paint applications, the missing knife, and slight inconsistencies with other releases, it's far from perfect, but nicely done. So that brings the total on this figure to 13 out of 25. Alright, so that's a wrap on my Mandalorian and Grogu and Kuiil review for May the 4th, and as a tribute to the upcoming Mandalorian and Grogu movie. I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I'm looking forward to seeing that. From what I understand, I could be wrong, but I think that's going to be a cap on the entire Mandalorian series. One way or the other, it looks like a fun movie to watch, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing that. As always, I appreciate you taking the time to watch this review. If you have a moment, please leave me a like, leave me a comment, or if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe. I have a lot more videos coming down the pipeline, and I do release fairly regularly. Be that as it may, most of my reviews are focused on Beast boxes, and I will have some more coming up pretty soon for that series, so be on the lookout for that. As far as Star Wars Black Series goes, again, like I said, I have a lot of figures that I still haven't even taken out of the package, so there's going to be a lot more of that for at least the next few years. And anyways, I hope you have a great week, you're enjoying the weather, and I'll look forward to talking again. Take care.